Story 1. Liking a movie does not mean it is good. Not liking a movie does not mean it is bad. Update. The Reddit algorithm is favoring this post, so you may see it regardless of upvotes. Sorry. Story 2. Probably the best acting I ever saw was watching Denzel Washington go from an ambulance chaser lawyer in Philadelphia to a warm-hearted human being. It all happened while he watched Tom Hanks' reaction to Maria Callas's opera singing. His reaction frightened him, so he left immediately. In the hallway he stopped and turned. He wanted to go back in to thank Hanks, perhaps to give him a hug, but his homophobia returned. He went home, knowing his emotions were too powerful to explain to his wife, so instead he hugged his daughter. That was when he became a decent human being, thanks to Tom Hanks and Maria Callas. The controversial part: he didn't even get an Oscar nomination for that. Story 3. Top Gun is a chick flick disguised as a testosterone-fueled fighter jock film. It is a love story with shirtless men playing volleyball and just enough air combat to make the boyfriends of its primary viewers want to watch with them. Story 4. Paulie did not slice the garlic thinly enough to melt in the pan. Story 5. The Godfather Part 3 is not a bad movie in the slightest. It is a 7 or even 8 out of 10 and only seems inferior because of the earlier films. Story 6. Robert De Niro plays the same character in 80% of his movies. He only changes the name. Story 7. Daniel Day-Lewis can at times overact. I know that in the eyes of the internet he can do no wrong, but sometimes he does a little wrong. Story 8. Captain America saying Avengers Assemble makes no sense. They are already there, lined up behind him. Story 9. The film Children of Men is categorically better than the book. I love Phyllis Dorothy James, a fantastic thriller and crime writer with a prescient socio-political sense. But she writes action like appliance instructions. Story 10. I loved Seth MacFarlane's A Million Ways to Die in the West. I will never understand the degree of visceral hatred the movie received. It was silly and exactly what you would expect from him, yet people acted as if it were worse than cancer. Story 11. My most controversial take is that it is a waste of time to watch bad movies. Life is just too short. At the same time, I admit I want to watch The Fifth Element about 3 times a year. Story 12. Since the 1980s, Al Pacino has acted as if he were high on the devil's marching powder. Story 13. Dame Judi Dench can do no wrong in my eyes, but she is wooden and phoning it in for the Bond films. Story 14. Rocky Horror fans generally ruin the film before anyone has a chance to watch it. Story 15. Spaceballs is better than the entire Disney's Star Wars sequel trilogy. Story 16. Gravity is a terrible film, and Sandra Bullock's character had no business being an astronaut. Most of the movie shows her hyperventilating and running out of air. Story 17. Marvel movies are a destructive force in the industry. They recycle the same tropes repeatedly and are poorly rehashed. Leave your brain at the door and not in a good way. Story 18. The movie you loved in childhood probably was not actually good. Nostalgia is a powerful influence. Story 19. Liking David Lynch or Quentin Tarantino movies does not make you edgy. Story 20. Joker, the one from 2019, sucks. The second time the protagonist made that stupid laugh, I turned it off. Story 21. I think Simon Pegg said something in his Criterion Closet visit that I have always believed. A movie is not obligated to present something you agree with or support or to make you comfortable. Liking a movie does not mean you agree with or support it, and it does not mean the writer or director support it. I see so many brain-dead takes that conclude a movie is bad simply because it showed something bad. Story 22. Movies that pass off boredom as art are not truly art. There is always a way to make films entertaining and engaging without sacrificing artistic integrity. David Lynch is perhaps the best example of a filmmaker whose work is both transformative and consistently entertaining. Story 23. Movie tickets are wildly expensive compared to most other forms of entertainment. People wonder why theaters are struggling when they have priced out many people who would otherwise see more films. Add the very affordable electronics available for home theater setups, and you have a perfect storm. Even video games, at $70, can break down to less than a couple of dollars an hour. Something has to give. Story 24. The Shining is overrated. It is spectacle with no sense, and Jack Nicholson starts off already mentally unstable instead of being driven mad by the hotel. Story 25. Jaws 2 is not a bad movie. It is bad compared to Jaws. Jaws 3 and Jaws The Revenge, however, remain absolute dog's hype. Story 26. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is a masturbatory look at 1960s and 1970s Hollywood, and should not be considered a compelling film, let alone a film that received 10 Academy Award nominations. I understand Quentin Tarantino loves old Hollywood, but he should have written an actual story about it instead of making half a movie and then shoving in a fictional Charles Manson retelling to serve as the climax and plot. The acting and filmmaking are strong, but the movie feels pointless despite those strengths. Story 27. Tom Cruise is not a very good actor, but he is an extremely hard worker and very good at choosing roles. Story 28. People mock Dwayne Johnson, Mark Wahlberg, Kevin Hart, Ryan Reynolds, Gal Gadot, and others on Reddit's movie forums for playing themselves in films, but many actors do the same, such as Paul Rudd and Keanu Reeves. The only difference is that we like some actors more, so we do not criticize them as harshly. Story 29. The Dark Knight is overrated and deeply flawed. Batman Begins is superior. Story 30. I hated Pacino's acting in Heat. It's as if he's trying to be Gary Busey as a cop. Story 31. Buster Keaton was superior to Charlie Chaplin in just about every way. His stunts were better, his jokes funnier, and his stories better written. Keaton played with the expectations of reality and the conventions of film, making his movies more interesting as a result. Keaton's protagonists come across as both lovable and clever, while there is a simpering quality to Chaplin that I cannot stand. Story 32. Same as last time, the ending of The Mist is laughable nonsense, as if Unlucky Alf from the Fast Show had been dropped in at the last minute. Story 33. Most superhero movies would be 10 times better if they were 90 minutes instead of 3 hours. Story 34. Grizzly Man is a comedy made from the material of a tragedy. When I first saw it, I had no idea the footage was from real events. I thought it was a comedy in the vein of the Royal Tenenbaums. It could have been presented as a tragic documentary, but every scene is a comic scene that exposes the idiocy of the main character. Story 35. John Carpenter's The Thing is the best movie ever made. I won't argue with anyone about this. I believe it deep down. Story 36. Shia LaBeouf was not the worst part of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. He was the only one who was actually acting. The scene in which he realized his mentor and father figure had lost his mind made me realize this. Everyone else was either phoning it in or chewing. The scenery, except Karen Allen, who seemed to be enjoying the ride in a way that was hard to understand. Although she was middle-aged, she was extremely sprightly and adorable. He did not write the scene with the monkeys, but that was what everyone blamed him for. Story 37. Musicals are horrible, and people who say they enjoy them lie just to annoy me. Story 38. If you take the average rating for each movie, then Star Wars is not very good. Story 39. Deadpool sucks. It's full of unfunny, cringe-worthy teenage boy jokes. I've never had a worse experience in a cinema. Story 40. When it comes to classic films, Modern Times was a better movie than Citizen Kane. Factory scene in Modern Times. Story 41. When no one is regulating James Gunn, as in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 and Volume 3, his humor is not funny. Feels forced. Story 42. The Wolf of Wall Street was boring as fuck. I kept thinking, I don't care, get on with it. He crashed his Lamborghini and I thought, okay, the movie will be almost done soon. But it went on for another hour. Story 43. The Lord of the Rings movies are terrible. They drone on, and the computer-generated imagery, even in the early 2000s, was weak. Story 44. WALL-E was a masterpiece right up until random bullshit somehow restored WALL-E's personality. That unearned, untelegraphed happy ending was pulled from the arsehole of what had been an amazing, tragic conclusion. Stop it, Disney. Tragic endings can be beautiful in their sacrifice. Story 45. Movies don't need to be profound or relay some grand message through allegory. It's entertainment, can be mindless and fun. Story 46. You only love Star Wars movies if you were first exposed to them at 13 years of age or younger. Story 47. Star Wars Episode 8 is a decent film. They should have allowed Rian Johnson to write the entire third trilogy. Story 48. Joker as a character is not interesting enough to warrant the number of films made about him. He is boring. Story 49. Black Panther did not deserve an Academy Award nomination for Best Picture. Story 50. I do not mind that we are in an age with few original stories. I kind of like many of these remakes and reimaginings. Story 51. Aliens is kind of sloppy. Alien was a phenomenal masterpiece of suspense, combining the horror of the unknown with themes of power dynamics and capitalism. It is remarkable how solid the film is. Every lingering shot is sublime. Aliens is cartoonish. The characters are one-dimensional and the pace at which they fall is monotonous and uninteresting. A handful of well-framed shots does not save it. There is little left in the way of curiosity and intrigue. The android reveal in the first film was a fascinating twist, but in this one they know they cannot get away with it again, so they simply make him likable and showcase his abilities. The whole film is overly explicit in its exposition. Very little has purpose other than to make audiences roar in theaters. Sadly, so many people saw Aliens at an impressionable time in their lives that they have imprinted on it as if it were apparent, and they cannot appreciate that Aliens is barely a notch or two above Alien 3. Story 52. Movies were better in the 1980s and 1990s. Now they are mostly computer-generated imagery and artificial intelligence slop without substance. There seem to be no original ideas or stories. It is just remakes and rehashes of classics. Story 53. If it had originally been released as a single 4-hour epic, Kill Bill would have swept the Academy Awards and is by far Quentin Tarantino's best film. Story 54. Eugene should have stayed dead at the end of Tangled. His resurrection is not sufficiently foreshadowed to be earned, and it severely cheapens his sacrifice. Story 55. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is fine. If you do not like it, stop watching. People complain about Phase 5 as if Phase 1 and Phase 2 were great. Story 56. The movie industry would be in a better place if Marvel and Detective Comics had never released a single film. Story 57. The Witch is overrated. Napoleon Dynamite is horrible. Comedies have been dumbed down so they do not make people feel inadequate. The Boy Who Knew Doctor Strange, formerly The Boy Who Knew Iron Man and Spider-Man, isn't as good as people want it to be. Franklin Delano Roosevelt American Badass is the greatest movie of all time. Story 58. Horror movies outside very niche genres better have a damn good reason for showing the monster fully exposed on screen, because imagination and uncertainty keep people on edge. That lingering uncertainty is what made It Follows great. Story 59. Watchmen is a masterpiece or, depending on how you look at it, an impressive adaptation. You could argue that Zack Snyder may have misunderstood the author's intentions, but the film displays a strong mix of style and substance. The Bob Dylan montage and the opening scene are iconic and brutal. Every character is well cast and interesting. Whatever the film may lack, it shows that Snyder can do excellent work when he is not writing. Story 60. Bring on the downvotes, but Pulp Fiction is the most overrated movie I have ever seen. I am okay with nonlinear storytelling when it adds something to the experience. It didn't really do that for me. It felt like it was done for the sake of doing it without any particular purpose. I don't know, maybe I just didn't get it. Story 61. Point Break is the most unintentionally funny movie ever made. Story 62. Arrival is not a good movie. The idea is great as a short story, but the adaptation to a feature-length film does not work at all. One caveat is that I still think it deserved to win the Academy Award for Best Sound Editing. Story 63. Aliens is incredibly overrated. It is just a pretty good action movie and nowhere near as good as the original Alien. Alien 3 is underrated and returns to the spirit of Alien. Story 64. Hereditary was one of the worst movies I have ever seen. Every October my wife and I run horror marathons. A year or two ago, we were recommended Hereditary by multiple people, so we decided to watch it. First, the entire first half of the movie isn't even horror. It's just a really depressing family story. Second, the horror elements are cliched, with the scary figure barely in view in the background or relying on jump scares. Even my wife, who is more forgiving of horror movies, found it atrocious. Story 65. Keanu is a bad actor. The only movie he works in is The Matrix. Story 66. Rogue One is at best a decent film that is on par with The Rise of Skywalker. Story 67. I did not say Forrest was racist, but the argument he even had a black friend is silly. The fact that Lieutenant Dan married an Asian woman could simply mean he has a fetish. Arguments about having a black friend or a girlfriend prove nothing. Jenny did have a traumatic childhood, and her actions throughout the movie are clearly the result of that. But why was she portrayed as a leftist with a violent boyfriend in contrast to the good guy Forrest? Give me a break. Story 68. Inglourious Bastard is possibly Tarantino's worst film because it features too much drawn-out dialogue and too many cartoonish characters. As a result, it does not sustain pathos or suspense. The movie opens and closes on a high note and comes to life whenever Christoph Waltz is on screen, but it is rather boring overall. Story 69. Christoph Waltz was the only good part of Inglourious Bastard. Story 70. I will move out of the house as soon as I notice anything strange happening. Story 71. The book that A Clockwork Orange was based on had a very different ending. Alex matures and wants the same things as his friend who left immature behavior behind. The author did not like how the characters were left. Instead of seeing the social commentary as intended, with nuance, many viewers, especially teenagers, idolized Alex's casual violence. This was Kubrick's decision. It does not matter how visually impressive the film is. The resulting story is poor. Story 72. I did not like John Wick and do not respect it at all. It is not just because of the dog scene. The structure is like an old adult film, plainly formulaic and lazy. The dialogue is poorly written and repeatedly leads to what the viewer came to see. Replace the sex with a shootout. Story 73. The Godfather Part 2 was sometimes hard to follow. I know Fredo was a jerk and broke Michael's heart, but the modern scenes feel stilted and confusing. You could take the Vito scenes and intersperse them appropriately in the first film, and leave the modern scenes from Part 2 and all of Part 3 on the cutting room floor. Story 74. Spider-Man movies and media are produced so Sony can retain the rights, which forces yearly releases. This has caused an oversaturation of content and declining quality. How many times will Spider-Man have to hold things together with his body instead of using webs? How much younger will they make the characters? And how long until the audience has had enough? Story 75. Minecraft fans and non-fans alike are to blame for the success of the Minecraft movie. Story 76. No superhero film has ever been better than 7 out of 10. Superhero films are broadly entertaining but not classics. Story 77. Spielberg is at his best directing popcorn adventure movies, such as Indiana Jones and Jurassic Park. When he tackles more serious topics, he often simplifies the material so much that other directors might do a better job. Yet, the criticism aimed at his films rarely reflects on him as a director. Few people speak favorably about Artificial Intelligence, War Horse, or Ready Player One these days, but he still retains a reputation as an amazing director who can do no wrong. I cannot think of anyone else in Hollywood who seems so impervious to criticism. Story 78. With the exception of The Chamber of Secrets, the Harry Potter films were pretty awful. Story 79. Catherine Bigelow's movies all suck, with Point Break being the lone exception. Cringy one-liners such as "I'm the motherfucker who found this place, sir," and non-stop bootlicking. Her film titles also sound like Seinfeld movie titles. Story 80. It is perfectly fine to walk out of a movie theater if you do not like the movie enough to stay. Story 81. I do not care that they took drillers up to an asteroid instead of using astronauts. Armageddon was a fantastic movie and I was highly entertained. Story 82. The first Suicide Squad movie wasn't that bad. It was a fun, over-the-top comic book movie. Story 83. The Hobbit movies are good and do some things even better than the book, such as Sauron the Necromancer, Dol Guldur, and the characterization of the dwarves. Do not get me wrong. They definitely have their issues and are not as good as The Lord of the Rings, but people act as if they are among the worst movies ever made, and they are overly criticized. Story 84. Star Wars, at least the original trilogy, is not science fiction. It is high fantasy set in a science fiction universe. Story 85. Tron Ares is a good movie only tarnished by the sheer abundance of Disney-approved Jared Leto close-ups. Story 86. I do not like The Shawshank Redemption, and you cannot change my mind. Story 87. David Lynch's Dune is better than the new ones. Nolan's Batman movies are on the same level as Transformers. Story 88. On Borrowed Time is the most underappreciated black and white film of all time. Story 89. Movies have been ruined by huge battles in franchises such as Marvel, Detective Comics, and even The Lord of the Rings. Those sequences are mostly computer-generated imagery, and you know the good guys will win, so it is impossible to care if you have half a brain. Story 90. Encanto was a terrible movie masked by an amazing soundtrack. Story 91. Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory is a dream sequence. Everything after he wakes and finds the last ticket is a dream. In the original Total Recall, the memory Quaid paid for is the implanted memory. Hence his girlfriend's image is briefly shown on a video screen behind him as he is being put under. The Purge is a fascinating film that explores what happens when rules meant to protect society suddenly cause individual suffering. The Exorcism of Emily Rose is not just a horror film. It is interesting because it explores how far religious freedom should extend before secular law takes over. Story 92. Batman Begins was a great movie. The Dark Knight was just an okay movie. I didn't think it was edited well, and the acting was not memorable, including Heath Ledger. I like practical effects, but the effects used and the cinematography were poor. The entire story was predictable and recycled from other works of art. The Dark Knight Rises was bad. The Batman was a good movie until the flood. Story 93. The Godfather Part 2 is far from being the best performance of Robert De Niro. Story 94. Violet Beauregarde should have won in the original Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Story 95. It is okay to dislike a movie you have never watched, either entirely or partially. If the first 10 minutes or the trailer bothered you, angered you, triggered you, made you uncomfortable, or made you sad, you can stop there and say you do not like the movie. That does not mean the movie is bad. It means you do not like it. Some people say you must watch the whole film to have a say, but you do not have to. You do not even need a reason to dislike a movie. Story 96. No matter how classic and iconic a movie is, its outdated production quality affects my willingness to watch it. Story 97. For sure. The Lighthouse is a good movie, even though I do not understand why. Laughing out loud. Story 98. Mulholland Drive isn't so weird and confusing. What's going on is actually pretty straightforward. It's still a good movie, but it's not some mind-bending journey. Story 99. Batman Forever is the most entertaining Batman movie. It strikes a wonderful balance, in my opinion, with Kilmer's Bruce Wayne and Batman playing it completely straight against the mad neon nightmare of Schumacher's Gotham. Sure, some characterizations are off and I don't love a 25-year-old Dick Grayson, but that movie is a blast from start to finish. I couldn't even get half an hour into a rewatch of Reeves's overtly serious edgelord schlock. Batman can be fun, guys. Story 100. I am not saying they are bad movies in any sense, but I have never enjoyed a Tarantino film. Story 101. Most horror movies are poor. Jump scares and sudden loud noises are not truly frightening. They are simply the natural human reaction to abrupt sounds. A real horror movie has no jump scares and continues to unsettle you after it ends. Story 102. I do not like the Daniel Craig Bond films. They try too hard to be gritty and like Jason Bourne. If I wanted Bourne, I would watch one of those. I want a campy, over-the-top, gadget-wielding farce. Story 103. Many people over 40 still refer to films they saw 20 or more years ago as examples of excellence, poor quality, viewing habits, and so on, even though they no longer watch films as much or in the same way. For example, someone might call Meet Joe Black a great film for a rainy autumn evening, but they may not have watched it in full during such an evening for more than 15 years. Opinions of people over 40 often reflect movies they saw up to age 25. They remain mentally stuck in that era even when it no longer reflects their current viewing habits. In short, they may not realize they are living differently than when they were young. Story 104. Christopher Nolan's films are pretentious and have needlessly long runtimes. Story 105. Batman. The Dark Knight from 2008 is one of the worst superhero movies ever, full of plot holes and general stupidity by the characters. If not for Heath Ledger's death, it would have ruined Batman. When it was released, my friends and I had not heard of his death and we all thought the film was poor. Story 106. Shock movies can have redeeming value and artistic merit, though many people are afraid of or disgusted by them and criticize others who watch them. Examples include Pink Flamingos, The Human Centipede, Salo or The 120 Days of Sodom, Necromantic, a Serbian film, Cannibal Holocaust, Antichrist. Story 107. The Star Wars prequel trilogy is awful, and most defenders do so out of nostalgia or by relying on years of supplementary material that patch some glaring issues. The sequels are also bad, but in an entirely different way. Story 108. Interstellar is dull and predictable except where it becomes nonsensical. It is overly long, pseudo-intellectual with little substance and many flaws. One exception is the black hole simulation. The filmmakers invested heavily to get it right, so that part is fair enough. Gravity, while a spectacular sequence of events, is significantly closer to physical plausibility. It contains no hyperspace or time travel. Although it remains a dramatic film, its plausibility is still limited. My argument is that Gravity is both a better film and closer to reality. I have a persistent chip on my shoulder about this issue, and if I ever meet Neil deGrasse Tyson, this is the topic I will raise. Story 109. The ending of Jacob's Ladder ruins the rest of the movie. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.